like your med. Just want to remind everybody to mute themselves when not speaking.
Nadine, no.
Nadine, we are live.
Chairman, we're live.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all attending the RTA's virtual meeting of the Board of Directors. The Governor's emergency declaration remains in force during the current COVID-19 pandemic, and pursuant to his executive orders declaring a public health emergency and recent amendments to the Open Meetings Act, we continue to operate under the permission to conduct our meeting without physical attendance requirements. As the head of the public body, I find it's not prudent or practical to hold an in-person meeting or to have staff or any members of the board at our headquarters during today's meeting. So let's review the guidelines for our meeting today. Keep your audio on mute as much as possible to minimize background noise, which may impair the recording. When you hear a question or comment, please raise your virtual hand, and the Secretary, Jeremy LaMarche, will call on board members who have raised their hands one at a time. When he calls on you, lower your hand and unmute before you begin speaking. And as our counsel, Nadine, always reminds us, give it a second or two, just in case there's any delay. When we get to voting, please raise your hand to make a motion or a second. Jeremy will identify who's making the motion and the second for the record, and after he announces the motion and second, lower all your hands, please. Are there any questions at this time? I think unfortunately we've been through this before. With that said, I'll now call the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority to order, and I will now recite the Pledge of Allegiance. You can keep yourselves muted. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Secretary, can you please take the roll?
Sure. Director Indulcio.
Here.
Director Canty.
Here.
Director Carey.
Here.
Director Colson.
Here.
Director Fuentes.
Here.
Director Gavin.
Here.
Director Gorman.
Here.
Director Groven.
Here.
Director Holt.
Here.
Director Kotel.
Here.
Director Lewis. Director Melvin.
Here.
Director Pang.
Here.
Director Ross.
Here.
Director Saga.
Here.
Chairman Dillon.
Present.
15 present, 1 out.
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone for their excellent attendance as always. Item 3A on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the board meeting held on August 19th, 2021. Are there any comments or corrections?
I see no hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, how about a motion and a second from?
I have a, I'm sorry, I have a motion from Director Holt and a second from Director Indulcio.
Great, thank you. With that, on a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting, Mr. Secretary, will you take the roll call on that, please?
Yes. Director Indulcio.
Aye.
Director Canty.
Yes.
Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson.
Aye.
Director Fuentes.
Aye.
Director Gavin.
Yes.
Director Gorman.
Aye.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Holt.
Aye.
Director Kotel.
Aye.
Director Lewis. Director Melvin.
Yes.
Director Pang.
Yes.
Director Ross.
Yes.
Director Sager.
Yes.
Chairman Dillard.
Yes,
15 ayes, 1 absent, Mr. Chairman.
thank you. So our minutes from August 2021 are approved. Item 4 is the public comments segment of the meeting. We've asked the public to submit their comments via electronic mail. Mr. Secretary, did we receive any this month?
We have no public comment at this time.
Okay, great. Then we'll move on to item 5, which is the Executive Director's report of Leanne Redden. Good morning, Leanne.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board and guests that we have with us today. At the outset here, I'm going to start off with a bit of good financial news to get us started. Last week, 2 separate rating agencies, Fitch and S&P, assigned the RTA positive ratings, with Fitch maintaining its AA+ rating and S&P revising its outlook for the RTA from negative to stable and affirming its AA rating on the agency's existing general obligation bonds. This follows Moody's upgrade of sales tax bonds from A2 to A1 earlier this summer. S&P cited collection of online sales tax and infusion of federal stimulus dollars as 2 of the reasons for their upgrade. So some good news to get us going. Moving on to a legislative update. So next slide, please. In Washington, committees in the House and Senate are in the process of putting together a multi-trillion-dollar reconciliation package that Democrats hope to pass along party lines in the next couple of weeks. The reconciliation package is the vehicle for the social and economic priorities the Democrats are looking to advance through a parliamentary procedure known as reconciliation that would only require a simple majority and not require any Republican support. As part of that reconciliation legislation, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee released language this week, which created a new competitive $10 billion transit funding program centered around affordable housing and access to transit for residents in low-income communities. Progressive Democrats are urging for passage of the reconciliation legislation prior to the House passing the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And as a reminder, the Senate has passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was entitled Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act back in August after months of negotiation between Democrat and Republican lawmakers. The legislation would be a significant investment in our transit nation's infrastructure, providing looks like to be $106 billion in public transit funding over 5 years, which represents an increase of $41.1 billion or a 63% increase in spending from our current levels. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has given the House a deadline of September 27 to pass the bipartisan infrastructure measure. And as a reminder related to that, the FAST Act, that is the current federal transportation authorization bill, is set to expire at the end of September. As this board knows, investing in our nation's transit infrastructure is really crucial in creating equitable access to opportunity and battling climate change. Earlier this month, I think you all saw the severe flooding from Hurricane Ida that damaged parts of the New York subway and really served as a reminder for the need to continue to invest to ensure resiliency of our transit infrastructure well into the future. As always, we'll continue to monitor the infrastructure discussions taking place in Congress, and we'll keep you apprised as all of that progresses. Next slide, please. So we will hold our 2022 call for community planning projects in October. The call will open on October 8 and close on October 28. And we'll once again do this jointly with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or CMAP. The agency, the RTA Community Planning Program, offers transportation planning, land use planning, and plan implementation support through the region to advance our goals of the Invest in Transit Strategic Plan. but also aid in the development of walkable and sustainable communities near transit stations and along transit corridors. Since that program's funding began back in 1998, more than 200 projects have been funded across the region. As our 2021 call, the priority will be given to applicants from high and very high need communities. The priority was first introduced as part of 21, in 21, I should say, to ensure that funding and technical assistance is awarded to communities that are most in need. Project selection is expected to be completed by the end of this year, followed by a public comment period, and a presentation on the program of projects will be presented to the board in early 22. More details will soon be available on both the RTA and CMAP websites and in both of our agencies' newsletters. And I encourage you all to spread the word throughout your communities in the coming months. So next slide, please. Excuse me. I'd like to just briefly walk through today's agenda and highlight a few items. This morning, we're going to continue our discussion from last month on the Regional Transit Strategic Plan with a set of guest speakers discussing engagement, and I'll have more on that in a moment. The rest of the agenda includes a monthly financial report, multiple action items on a range of topics from compliance to funding. There's one contract for approval for the purchase and installation of new audiovisual equipment for the 16th floor boardroom, because we will be back there someday. And then additionally, Rta Hickey and Jill Leary will present and ask for your approval on action to establish the public funding funding allocations for the upcoming budget and capital program. So next slide. Before I introduce our guest speakers that we have, I wanted to recap a bit of what we spoke about last month as we kicked off the strategic plan work. As you can see on the graphic here, we envision approximately a 15-month process for developing of that plan, and it'll follow basically 3 tracks. Just to touch on those again, the first track is financial planning. This track will include the development of the 2022 and 2023 regional operating and capital budgets and the allocation of the remaining federal relief monies. In addition, that track and the yearly budget work, that track will analyze potential funding scenarios over 10 years to prepare the region and decision makers for needed future actions to ensure financial sustainability. And this track will culminate in a 10-year financial outlook plan that will be before you in the future. Simultaneously, the strategic planning track is going to provide a forum for conversations about trade-offs between visionary ideals and our funding realities, resulting in a new vision for our regional transit system. Activities will include identifying, the capital projects and other supporting elements needed to achieve that vision. At the end of 22, deliverables from both of those tracks will be combined to create a regional strategic vision and a 10-year financial plan to guide all 4 agencies and decision makers in future actions needed for implementation and funding. So underlying all these activities and continuing through implementation will be a communication and engagement track, which will ensure that the board, our stakeholders, and the public remains informed about this process. We can continually gather input, and that we are building the capacity for ourselves and our close audiences to implement the adopted plan. So let's focus for a moment on what is going to be happening between now and December. Our goal in these next few weeks is to focus internally and externally on identifying the issues the strategic plan needs to address. We had a good start with you guys and our kickoff discussion last month, and we have several more engagement activities planned while we continue our internal analysis and our research. So next slide, please. Excuse me. This process will gather input received from our close audiences, but we will also focus efforts on growing that audience through inclusive outreach and engagement so that we will also hear from those outside of our usual circles. We see our near-term engagement activities, or you can see them here listed on this slide, I should say. And later this month, we'll begin publishing a guest blog series on connections. So look to our bi-weekly newsletter and our website when those new posts are published. We'll have posts from transit voices across the region, the country, and hopefully perhaps even across the globe, discussing ideas and examples that we want to be aware of as we develop this shared vision. So far, we have writers with expertise on climate change, equity and access, and sustainable funding lined up, and are looking forward to sharing these posts with you and other stakeholders. We encourage you, each of you actually, to let us know too what you might want to hear from this series as well, so we can make sure we line that up also. We'll be holding workshops and virtual forums, as well as inviting input via a public survey. Through all of this, we'll be communicating with the public continually through our social media channels, newsletters, and through our partner channels to let them know how they can be further involved. And today we'll kick off a series of guest board presentations. Our goal is to bring you a few speakers or presentations each month between now and the end of the year to help you and our staff continue to hone our priorities and the ideas that we want to see carried out and maybe even become part of the plan itself. So topics and speakers we hope to bring in this series will include leaders on transit system adaptation, as well as speakers focus on infrastructure, investment, and climate change. So this month, I'm pleased to introduce two guests. Deborah Shaw, the commissioner on the board, a commissioner on the board of the Chicago Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, or MWRD, as many of us just refer to it in shorthand, and Tanya Adams, Vice President of Inclusion and Diversity and Community Relations and Equity Manager at WSP USA. Tanya is also the chair of the National Board of Directors for the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, or COMTA. Deborah Shaw has sat on the Board of Commissioners for MWRD since first running in 2006. She was re-elected for subsequent terms in 2012 and 2018. She recently served as the co-chair of that agency's strategic planning effort, which culminated in a plan adoption in June this year. Commissioner Shaw has agreed to speak with us and briefly take some questions about the importance of engagement to their efforts. So I think it's an interesting opportunity, sort of board member to talk to you about their engagement work that they did in developing their strategic plan. Tanya Adams is well known in regional transportation circles for her work in community relations and for her dedication in bringing underrepresented voices into the work of transportation projects and agencies. She was recently featured as a speaker for the Federal Transit Administration webinar series on building partnerships. Because of her expertise and counsel in this area, she is very often sought out to support that work. We are pleased to have both of them here today to speak with us about engagement, and I want to welcome two women that I have known for quite a bit of time and really appreciate their participation, their thoughts, and their insights. And before I turn it back, you may have just one final comment. You may have noticed that the state delinquency slide is no longer part of my report. Remember, we affectionately love that one. I'm happy to tell you, though, in all seriousness, that the state has caught up on debt with us. So that's great news. And we will continue to monitor that and we'll keep you apprised as appropriate. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will turn it back to you and we can get going on the rest of the meeting. Thank you, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions of Leanne? Well, if not, let's go on to item 6A. which is on the topic of our next regional transit strategic plan. And I know Leanne has introduced Commissioner or Chairwoman Deborah Shore from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. And Commissioner, thank you for joining us, and it's all yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you indeed for inviting me to spend a few minutes with you, Chair Dillard and Director Redden. Good to see you, and thanks again for the opportunity to share a little bit about our experience in working on a strategic plan. Let me say first that in my 14 years on the board of the Water Reclamation District, this is the first time that our board of directors, our board of commissioners, has been involved in shaping and drafting and developing the strategic plan from day one. And this was done, frankly, at our insistence because it's part of our role to set policy. And in prior 5-year strategic plans, they were crafted by the executive director and senior leadership, presented to the board for review and input and adoption, but we were never really involved in crafting the plan. We have a number of newer and engaged board members and really wanted to seize that opportunity and responsibility ourselves to be involved. So from the beginning, myself and Commissioner Marcelino Garcia were co-chairing this effort. We had a steering committee comprised of our executive director, 3 of our department heads, and our treasurer. And we received excellent help from the Civic Consulting Alliance that facilitated the development of our plan. And they were assisted by a team from Rta, the global design, planning, and engineering organization, and from AJ Carney. But we also felt that engagement from the community, from residents of Cook County, was vital. And so our strategic plan, as noted, we worked on for over a year. We had to hit the pause button in March of 2020 and resumed this year. But we came up with 5 strategic goals, and those are before you on the screen, and I'll drill in on community engagement today. Next slide, please. So our definition, our goal for community engagement is to engage with the community to position the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District as a critical community asset and to ensure that the district is a responsive neighbor and inclusive business partner. And I think those words responsive and inclusive are key. Next slide, please. So again, instead of having a solely internal process, which happened in the past, and you see on the left side of this slide, we wanted to engage a whole variety of stakeholders. So that involved extensive interviews with each of the 9 members of the Board of Commissioners. Rta posted a stakeholder workshop. Because we were in the virtual era, that was limited to about 50 participants, but they included a range of audiences, representatives from engineering firms who do business with the district, from nonprofit organizations and conservation groups, from some municipalities and so forth, who spent half a day in a brainstorming workshop that produced rich material for us. But we also wanted to reach out more broadly. So we developed a public-facing survey that was posted on the district's website, and we promoted participation widely. I know I sent it out to my list of people who get my newsletter and others as well. We had more than 200 responses to that. But we also wanted to engage the employees at the district, and this may have been the first time that was ever done, where we distributed an anonymous survey. so that they could share with us their thoughts, because workforce excellence was one of our strategic goals as well. And we received more than 550 responses out of a workforce of about 1,850 employees, which I thought was pretty good. And it was very valuable to hear from them. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we also built into this strategic plan was a filter of inclusion and equity for all that we do. And we wanted to prioritize what I would call authentic engagement. By that, I mean when we sought to reach out to the communities we serve, it wasn't so much to make sure they understood what the Water Reclamation District does, but that we listened and understood and asked, what is it they want us to know about themselves, their communities, their work? And that's what I consider to be a more authentic kind of engagement. It's listening, not so much talking. We also focused on capacity building and on ways to direct resources to disproportionately impacted areas. One thing I want to share is that as I spoke with some union leaders who represent about 1/3 of the employees at the Water Reclamation District, one of them noted that they communicate with their members by text message, that these are folks who are not at computer terminals, who don't always check email, but they do respond when they get a text. So I'd encourage you in your thoughts about outreach, and as you seek to reach not only the residents of the RTA service area, but the stakeholders in the partner agencies that you work with, to think about the mechanisms of communication if you want to engage them in responding to surveys and so on, and find out what's the best way to reach them. Finally, we did stress that this strategic plan is a living document. We did invite suggestions and comments from people who couldn't attend the longer stakeholder workshop, and we received quite a few. We weren't able to incorporate all of them, but we plan to revisit the strategic plan each year in concert with our budget process and ask ourselves, what have we accomplished? What do we need to focus on? How do we weave in new public comments? Next slide, please. So our short version of the strategic plan is available on our website. Please feel free to check it out. But behind that is about a 100-page roadmap that was developed by working groups at the district for each of those 5 strategic goals. And we sought to drill down in the structure of our management and employees, and include some employees who'd been at the district for 3 years or less, because we wanted a variety of ideas and engagement. And those working groups came up with the specific granular initiatives that they will be working on to achieve these strategic goals. That's not so much a public-facing document, but that will be our guide to chart our progress. Let me stop there and ask if you have any questions, and also please feel free to reach out to me or to my colleague, Commissioner Garcia, as you trundle along. I salute you for your effort and for your devotion to engagement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Deborah, thank you so much. I noted as the chairman of our organization here that you called it a living document. So I remind our folks all the time who sometimes get our shareholders who get a little worried from time to time. Hey, it's not set in stone. It is our strategic plan, but it is a living, breathing document, and things change as circumstances change. But Deborah, thank you so much. That was excellent. Are there questions from our board of directors to the chairwoman?
I'm taking a look now, Mr. Chairman.
Or
I see
comments?
I see no hands at this time.
Okay, well, great. And thank you, Commissioner, I've known you a long time, and, you are a complete, great public servant. And, the MWRD is just vital to Northeastern Illinois. It's a massive operation, as is mass transit. You do a great job, and we really appreciate your time, and Leanne and our staff at the RTA will continue to have great dialogue between our two operations. So thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, I do see a hand from Director Ross.
Absolutely. Dr. Ross, you have a question or comment?
Yes, I do. Given the amount of staff engagement that you had in this plan, what was their reaction after the plan was completed? What were the tangible results from a staff vantage point, I guess is what I'm asking.
So thank you, and I'm glad you asked. Not surprisingly, staff put workforce excellence as more important, or prioritize that a bit more than community engagement. And there were comments, this was an anonymous survey, but they were helpful, suggesting that we find ways to carve out a space for innovation and find ways to reward innovation. There were comments about the performance reviews and improving our process for promoting people based on performance. We have a civil service system, and sometimes it serves us well, but sometimes it's seen as having constraints. I felt that some of the specific comments were quite useful, and I hope that our managers and leaders will weave those into how they are doing their work.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you, Chairman Dillard, for your kind words. It's been an honor to serve.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Deborah. You've served very, very well and distinguished.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, it looks like we have one more question from Director Dorman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeremy, appreciate you being Commissioner Shore. Always wonderful to see you, and our paths actually crossed, many years ago as Commissioner and currently do now. Appreciate your involvement in helping us as we, proceed and whatnot. And you're kind of great, and I appreciate the respond, to reach out via text. Great option as well, and then with staff. You mentioned that you had 550 surveys that were compiled. What was that percentage with the workforce from the people that you reached out to? You may not know this. I was just curious.
Sure. I think our current census is about 1,800 employees.
I'm sorry, you cut
So
out there. How many employees?
550 out of 1,800. 1,800.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Still pretty good cross sample. All right. Commissioner, Chairwoman, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time, and we will stay in touch. Thanks. Thanks, Deborah. All right. Next, we'll hear from Tanya Adams. She's been introduced by Leanne. She is a vice president of WSP. She oversees inclusion and diversity and community relations and equity. And it's great to have Tanya with us. And Tanya, it's all yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm truly excited, and I actually can just say ditto to Commissioner Shore and everything that she said. But I'm often asked, how do we create a more equitable transportation system, particularly for those who are working that extra shift, who need to get from point A to point B? And how can we connect with communities through outreach to service these changes? For those who know me, I've dedicated my entire career, which is over 30 years in making a difference in the industry centered around inclusion, diversity, equity, and equality. And as the national chairwoman of COMTO, I can attest to COMTO's commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion for the past 50 years. And that's what I so much love about COMTO. It's dedicated to its mission and its core value. It's who we are as an organization. Equitable transit is one of our key missions. No one can be left behind or left on the side of the road. We, the FTA, RTA, PACE, Metro, CTA, and COMTO, and other entities must work together to make sure that our low income and people of color and elderly and people with disabilities have the same access to mobility options to provide convenient, reliable, accessible, and safe service. Creating an equitable transit system requires community involvement to identify the needs of the largest segment of our population and labor force. Equity can be a consideration for transit infrastructure, accommodates non-traditional work schedules, second and third shift, as well as walking, biking, ride sharing, and those much needed last mile connections. Bolstering a disadvantaged business enterprise DBE participation and community involvement provides a foundation for establishing partnerships that identify and address transportation problems, such as the last mile, and the service frequency for those who cannot afford their own personal transportation or afford Uber or Lyft. Adoption of strategic policies that reduce congestion, travel times, and support multimodal networks where travelers feel safe and assured their trips can be accomplished in the desired timeframe can contribute to improved quality of life for everyone. Current Rta programs that address transit planning, assisting riders with disabilities and seniors, providing specialized travel training, determines eligibility for ADA peer service, and a foundation for enhancing outreach and community engagement opportunities that could be considered in coordination with citizens advisory boards. Here's a few examples that we can do. Host information exchange and networking sessions for communities, as Commissioner Shore said, and listen at those events. Adopt a school to promote transportation careers. As we look across our industry, we need to make sure that we have more women and people of color in those positions. Partner with organizations like COMTO, WTS, that are committed to DE&I solutions. As a funding and project sponsor for villages, counties, suburban communities, and transit initiatives, in a position to include outreach engagements in your requirement for funding, such as the CREATE program. I'm happy to say that we have the City of Chicago, Cook County, IDOT, Metro, all involved in this project, ensuring that we are working with the railroads to work on the south side. But not only doing that, we're working with the 4 grade schools in that area. How do you do a project in the community and not involve those students who are there so they can understand the project and what's going on? Also offering internships for high schools there. Railroads also gave a grant of $25,000, I believe, to each of the schools to help them create an engineering program to better understand what's going on in their community. Agencies like the MTA have been working out in communities, far as helping with COVID relief, working with United Way and passing out over 3,000 care packages and masks. The MTA also has a diverse equity, inclusion, and culture initiative where they are working with COMTO to do a survey of their employees. And the key word is their employees out in the trenches and making sure we're hearing and listening to them because they are also part of the community. The other part is looking at what Miami-Dade is doing. Of course, they've done their part with the COVID awareness, but they also are creating mock interviews so they can work out in the community and help those who we are serving also have opportunities for employment. And of course, we have to be working with our millennials in the transportation careers. This is a focus on what they're looking for in a job, what attracts them, what are they looking to do in their outcomes. And finally, outreach that promotes workforce development in partnership with local schools, universities, and other opportunities to invest in community assets. Fostering long-term opportunities, single projects have been completed. Engaging with HBCUs as a part of a hiring strategy. And also working with our DBEs, making sure they're getting what they need when they're working with primes, more than just getting 1% or 2%. but making sure that they're able to build capacity with meaningful opportunities is key, and helping them with any roadblocks that they have. I want to leave you with a quote from one of my favorite people, Verna Myers. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And I would like to add that equity and equality allows us to play all music and everyone to keep on dancing, regardless of the circumstance. At Compto, we strive to create a community where everyone contribute. And that's the way we're going to have equity and equality. And I have to say that we just finished our strategic plan here at WSP. And a key component on that was our outreach. But not just doing something and leaving it after a project's gone, is working on there forever, making sure that we're reaching out, connecting, and keeping those connections. Make sure that we're mentoring and sponsoring, which is a key word to do. And also sponsoring with our employees internally, because they live in these communities that we're serving, and they must have a voice as well. Thank you. And are there any questions? And I'm waiting for my good friend to raise her hand.
Thank you. Yeah. Questions or comments?
One moment, Mr. Chairman. Director Gorman has a question.
Director Gorman.
I think Director Gorman might be on mute.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good catch. Thank you, Chairman Dillard and Tanya, for your comments. Yeah, having worked with Tanya at the Tollway and WSP, WSP was a great advocate, and they really walked the walk as far as diversity inclusion, and Tanya's wonderful intervention in helping with our diversity projects, you know, with WBE, MBE, DBE participation. I just want to thank her for her consistent work that she's done, not just at the Tollway, and I think that'll transcend to what we're doing at RTA, and look forward to working with you, Tanya, in that regard.
Thank you so much, Commissioners. I have to say, it takes all of us to do this. Inclusion, diversity doesn't end. It's not going to end in 2 years. It's a mission, a lifelong, and we have to keep on doing it. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. I really appreciate your comments. Jeremy, any other directors have comments or questions that you see?
I see no other hands at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Tanya, thank you so much, and we will stay engaged. We know where to find you, and vice versa, and very much appreciate your professional insight and help today. Thank you so much. All right, let's move on to item 6B, which is the presentation of the report on the monthly financial results through July of 2021. And I think Doug Anderson is going to brief the board this morning on our financial results.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman and Directors. This is Doug Anderson, RTA Manager of Budget and Analysis. Today, I'll cover the year-to-date Service Board financial results through July. This item is for informational purposes only. As B mentioned last month, overperformance of RTA funding and favorable expense performance continue to constrain the amount of relief funding able to be requisitioned for revenue replacement. These two good results in turn put downward pressure on the regional recovery ratio. Next slide, please. System ridership through July was 4.1% favorable to budget, shown by the orange bars rising above the dashed budget line. As a standalone month, July ridership reached nearly 45% of pre-pandemic levels, but ridership continues to head in the right direction. The current budget assumes that ridership will continue to recover to about 65% of normal by year end as commuting gradually increases and students return to in-person learning. Next month, we will receive new 2021 ridership forecasts from the service boards with their 2022 budget submittals, which could lower ridership projections for the balance of the year due to some of the COVID setbacks we've experienced, delaying many employers' return to office plans. Next slide, please. Actual RTA sales tax receipts for the month of May set a new record of $129.2 million, and indications are that June collections will be even higher. As we've mentioned before, the RTA sales tax applied to a broader range of online purchases has contributed to this resurgence, producing a total favorable public funding variance of $51.9 million, or 5.6%. The 9.3% unfavorable funding variance for ADA paratransit is due to slower than anticipated Rta drawdowns, but those are expected to catch up to budget as we move forward. CTA's result was 1.6% unfavorable through July because CTA has requisitioned less relief funding than budgeted, again, due to the strong sales tax results. Next slide, please. System-wide operating expenses through July were $68.1 million, or 4.1% favorable to the revised budget and highlighted in light blue, with each service board reporting favorable expense variances. Metra's actual expense results have improved to $20.1 million favorable to budget, but ongoing service restorations are expected to increase operating costs in the coming months. Pace Suburban Service had favorable results in each expense category, resulting in an overall favorable variance of $12.7 million, or 9.1%. CTA and ADA paratransit expenses have also remained under budget, but recovering ridership is expected to increase ADA costs as we move forward. Next slide, please. Surging sales tax and good expense performance are limiting the amount of federal relief funding needed for operations. That relief funding is counted as operating revenue for recovery ratio purposes. And as you can see with all of the red on this table, results have been dragged below budget by $110.5 million, or 15.3%. The imbalance caused by record sales tax and favorable expense performance is particularly acute at Metra, with operating revenue falling $76.1 million, or 29.3% short of the adopted budget, mostly due to reduced CARES Act requisitions. Next slide, please. Looking at the entire financial equation, you can see mixed net results on the system through July. The regional net result of negative $2.7 million was $9.5 million favorable to the amended budget. This is the financial metric where the favorable expenses and sales tax and the unfavorable operating revenue are offsetting each other. Because the service boards can only requisition enough relief funding to break even, we should see the actual net result continue to hover around zero as we begin to approach year end. Next slide, please. A quick update on the status of CARES Act funding drawdowns. The service boards collectively requisitioned approximately $30 million of additional CARES Act funding since last month's report, bringing the total CARES drawn up to 76% of the apportionment. CTA has drawn the highest percentage of CARES Act funding at 93% of their apportionment. Of the $397 million drawn this year, $362 million was associated with fare revenue losses and included in service board operating revenue for recovery ratio purposes. This was over $100 million less than budgeted. Next slide, please. In closing, the operating revenue shortfall has continued to put increasing pressure on recovery ratios. We call this a math problem because the service board's system-generated revenue and expense performance have been satisfactory. So the unfavorable recovery ratios are solely due to slower than anticipated relief funding drawdowns. Through July, the regional recovery ratio of 50.1% was almost 4 points unfavorable to budget, highlighted in red. You may notice that Metra's recovery ratio fell by more than 2 percentage points from last month's result, and Pace Suburban Service has now also swung unfavorable to budget by almost 2 points. If sales tax continues to overperform, which we do want and expect, the region is headed for a sub 50% finish, as B mentioned last month. We will be working with the service boards to seek relief from the 50% requirement while we are in this unusual circumstance of high sales tax and low fare revenue. That concludes my remarks. I'll try my best to answer any questions. Back to you, Chairman Dillard.
Thank you, Doug. Comments or questions from the board?
Director Melvin has a question, Mr. Chairman.
Morning, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, a very fine report. Thanks for great information. Just on this recovery ratio issue and the Metro problem, I mean, are you guys going to seek legislative relief? Is that, because that was mentioned before, or what's the plan here to do something about it? Because it's really, just a fault of the pandemic and the circumstances, and certainly everybody's doing a great job.
Doug,
That's
if you
correct.
want, I can jump in. Do you want? It's Leanne.
Please, Leanne.
Go ahead, Doug. If you've got something first to say, and then I'll jump in.
Well, I just think that the good news is we do have some time to reach a solution on this, because the end of the financial year won't happen until March of 2022. So that's the good news. And I think the other good thing is that the board did the right thing last month in finding the region not in substantial accordance with budget through the second quarter. That began to document the problem with the legislative leaders and the governor's office. But go ahead, Leanne.
So, and to excuse me, build upon that, there's sort of two strategies that we're talking about right now, and I think they're both going to need to happen. One is a short-term waiver of this requirement, so that will require conversation and an approval from the state legislature. And we'll probably seek to do that talk to the stuff, like Doug said, we've already started documenting this with those audiences, if you will, and we'll continue that into the fall and into the spring discussions in Springfield. I anticipate that we'll be looking for sort of this short-term or more immediate sort of waiver relief kind of approach. And probably not just for this year, but if we're projecting out, we're probably going to have the same very similar situation next year as well. But as part of, we also need to have this longer term conversation about, is this even a sustainable model? Is this even the right number to be tracking against? What are the metrics? But as important to that, and this is all part of sort of some of the stuff we'll talk about. I mentioned sort of this two parts to the strategic plan, sort of the financial and then the policy. This is very much part of the longer term conversation that we're beginning now, but continue into the coming months for longer term solution and strategy conversation, solution, whatever words you want to use, with our partners in Springfield, because it's a structural issue. And we think kind of coming out of the pandemic and recovering from the pandemic, the world is going to continue to look differently. We already had some of these structural issues pre-pandemic. They've been exacerbated by the pandemic. So there's both kind of this short-term Springfield sort of approach as well as a longer-term strategy. Because if we're looking at, additional funding sources, those kinds of things, that's a much longer, more complex conversation with our legislative partners in Springfield. So both tacks will need to take.
Absolutely. And Jeremy, we need to watch the legislative calendar. If we're facing some kind of March deadline, that's kind of, as you know, sometimes a dead time in the legislature's life. So we need to watch that legislative calendar. If we really do need a fix, very carefully, just to make sure that they're around, the General Assembly's around.
Absolutely. And Mr. Chairman, it looks like Dr. Sagar has a question as well.
Yes, Doctor, good morning.
Good morning, and I apologize. I really don't have a question. I just want to say thank you so much to our guests who provided, I think, some excellent insights, but also for the most current reports from our executive director and with regards to our finances. And I must apologize. I'm trying, as so many of us, to do two things at one time. And so if the chairman is willing, I would just like to, I'm going to have to exit, and I would very much appreciate my vote being recorded in favor of all the items that are before us today. And I appreciate all the work that they did in the pre-meeting to kind of update us on those things. So I am in favor of those items. And so, Mr. Chairman, if you're willing to record, because I do have to respectfully ask to be dismissed at this time.
Yeah, Dr. Sagar, we'll let the record reflect that you are in favor of all of those items. My guess is you probably cannot be on the official roll call, but we're going to let the record reflect that you are in favor of the items, as they each come up. We'll just make sure that's in the minutes. So thank you, Doctor, very much.
I thank you.
All right, Doug, thank you very much. We'll go on to item 7A, and that's an ordinance authorizing long-term borrowing. And Bill Lackman will brief the board on this. Bill?
Thank you, Chairman Dillard. Good morning, members of the RTA board. As Chairman Dillard noticed, this is RTA Treasurer Bill Lackman presenting. Next slide, please. This morning, I am seeking board approval for the RTA to competitively sell $93.6 million of general obligation refunding bonds to advance refund outstanding RTA 2014A bonds. As required under the RTA's General Bond and Note Ordinance, annual debt service on the 2021A refunding bonds will not exceed that of the 2014A bonds. Moreover, interest rates on the 2020A bonds will be no higher than those on the 2014A bonds. The 2014A bonds are not subject to optional redemption until the June 1st, 2024 call date. Therefore, the proceeds of the 2021 bonds and the 2014A Debt Service Reserve Fund will be held in escrow to pay the principal and interest of the 2014A bonds. Through 2044, net present value savings, net of cost of issuance of 8 to 12%, or $6.9 million to $10.4 million, are expected from the refunding. Cash flow savings are estimated at nearly $1 million annually, or $24 million through 2044. I'd like to introduce Bond Counsel Matt Miller of Ice Miller and financial advisors Kate De Prosperas and Reagan Holliday of Hilltop Securities, who are with us this morning to help address any questions. Matt, Kate, Reagan, you just want to say hello and introduce yourselves?
Good morning. I'm Matt Miller. I'm partner at Ice Miller. Bond counsel for this transaction. We've been working with the RTA for several years on some of their financings and are happy to be a part of this. It's a great opportunity and timing for the market, and happy to answer any questions that you may have with respect to the financing.
Kate, Reagan?
Sure. This is Kate De Prosperas. I'm here from Hilltop Securities. This is our first time working with the RTA in quite a while, but we do have recent experience here in Illinois. We were a financial advisor for Illinois Toll as well, and work with a lot of local Illinois issuers. So we are excited to work with the RTA on this refunding transaction.
And Reagan, I believe you're on the phone without a picture.
I don't hear her. No, she's not on.
Well,
that's all right. We got Kate. Are there
Sure.
any questions of the board or comments?
One moment, Mr. Chairman. I see, I'm sorry, Director Holt has a question.
Great, thank
Sure,
you.
Paul. Morning.
B and I didn't get a chance to connect on this, so you all might be aware of my question, but I was wondering if you could give me just a short explanation on the floor that you've set for the savings and why it was at 3% and not at a higher percentage.
So let me start off, and Kate, you can follow up.
Sure.
The 3% is a rule of thumb used by the GFOA and many other municipal bond organizations. It is just a rule of thumb. It certainly depends on economic conditions. It depends on the size of the bond issuance. But it is just sort of the standard, but it is not necessarily something that is a hard and fast rule for any particular bond issue. Kate, is there anything else you want to say on that?
No, Bill, I think you did a great job of explaining that. So typically, just industry-wide municipalities use that 3%. As Bill said, it's not a hard and fast, but it is a number that's been used for many years in municipal underwriting as a basis for starting the discussion of refunding bonds. I would say that when we are reviewing this transaction, the number is much higher. We're expecting the number to be much higher than that, but we really use a lower number when providing for a floor to give that flexibility at pricing. So we aren't going into the market for another few weeks. And as you know, market conditions can be very, fluctuate and can be volatile. So usually you want to have some level of a floor approved by your board so that, we're given the authority to move forward with a minimum savings threshold. That's not necessarily what we're expecting from this transaction, but it would be the level that is the minimum amount that you're comfortable moving forward. So that's where the 3% comes in. But currently, the last turn of numbers that we ran, we're looking at well above that. But we usually like to allow for some level of flexibility, given that we are unsure what market conditions will be like on the day of pricing.
Thank you, Kay.
Sure.
Yes, and I also want to mention again that 3% is net of cost of issuance.
Right.
All right, thank you, Bill. That's very helpful because the transaction costs in a deal like this are quite high, and so 3%. I understand, the rule of thumb, but as I said, I think it seemed to be a little bit low. So I appreciate the additional information.
Sure, certainly. Are there other questions?
It appears that Director Gorman has a question as well.
Just a little clarification on Director Holt's question regarding the 3% savings and then what's on the slide where it says 8 to 12% savings differential. Maybe you guys are talking about.
Sure. So the 8 to 12% is kind of a range of what we're expecting, just depending on how interest rates come in. So as mentioned, we are doing a competitive sale, which means we set the date of the pricing, and that's going to be the 29th of September. And on that day, many firms will submit their best interest rates, and we will take the lowest true interest cost, which is a compilation of all the interest rates over the course of the financing. And the lowest cost will be awarded the transaction. So we do not know as of today what the interest rates will be on this transaction. But, Hilltop Securities is also a broker dealer and underwriter. So it is helpful, to the RTA because we are able to go and ask our underwriters, as of today, what does, transaction with this rating and this security, this structure, what would you see interest rates at? And so that's what we've been providing the authority periodically throughout our engagement, is an update of numbers based on where our firm sees the transaction coming in at. And so right now, the last set of numbers was roughly at that higher end of the savings estimate. But we, conservatively want to provide for a range, not knowing what things might, be in the next few weeks. And so we would estimate between 8 and 12% savings, which is like $6.9 to $10.4 million of savings. That's where those figures are coming from, kind of a spot rate of what we've seen the last few weeks.
And this is Matt Miller with Ice Miller, and just to kind of supplement what Kate said with respect to the competitive sale, the RTA is required to go to competitive sale for the long-term debt.
Right.
Thank you.
Director Melvin has a question.
Thank you. Yeah, it's more of a comment. I mean, with rates this low, it's the prudent thing to do. It's reasonable, it's smart, and I'm certainly in favor of it. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
I see no other hands at this time.
Thank you. Just
I'm
for the
sorry,
new
Mr.
member.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Director Colson's hand is raised as well.
Yeah, Director Colson.
Yeah, I think this is a great idea, but we have to recognize that at least as I read this, from 2021 to 2024, we'll show $200 million of debt on the books, even though it's really 100 million. Is that correct, the way I'm looking at that?
No, actually, we're defeasing the 2014 A bonds upon sale of the 2020. We're defeasing the 2014 A bonds when we sell the 2021 A bonds. So the old bonds will no longer be on the books. They will be the responsibility of, they will be refunded. The refunding will take place between now and the June 2014 call date, and they'll be off the books as soon as we have.
As soon as we close.
Yeah. So this is Matt Miller again. So just kind of the mechanics of what will happen is the 2021 A bonds will close. The proceeds from those bonds and the amount in the debt service reserve fund from the 2014 A bonds will be deposited with an escrow agent who is also the trustee for the RTA. Upon that happening, there will be a verification report that amounts in that escrow fund are sufficient to pay principal and interest until the call date, and then redeem the funds on the call date, or redeem the bonds on the call date. At closing, the bonds will be legally and economically defeased, so they will not count against. They won't go on the books of the RTA, and they don't count against the RTA's debt limit.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Thank you, Matt. Jeremy, any other questions?
I see no other hands at this time.
So again, staff is requesting that the board adoption of this ordinance authorizing the RTA to issue the 2021 A bonds through competitive sale to refund the bonds outstanding on our 2014 A bonds as permitted by section 4.04 of the RTA Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. How about a motion and a second on item 7A, our ordinance authorizing, which we don't do very often, long-term borrowing?
We've got a motion by Director Holt, second by Director Melvin.
Great members to do that. It gives me much more confidence. I had it before, though. With that, Mr. Secretary, please take the roll.
Director Andalcio.
Aye.
Director Canty.
Aye.
Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson.
Aye.
Director Fuentes.
Aye.
Director Gavin.
Aye.
Director Gorman.
Aye.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Holt.
Aye.
Director Cotel.
Aye.
Director Lewis. Director Melvin.
Yes.
Director Pang.
Yes.
Director Ross.
Aye.
Director Sager. Chairman Dillard.
I'm an aye, and just as a reminder, Dr. Sager earlier said that if he were still in the meeting, he'd be in favor of item 7A. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll have the record reflect his intent. 14 ayes, 2 absent, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
And all of our great financial team. Item 7B are a couple of ordinances authorizing the amendment of the 2021 to 25 capital program and amending ICE funded projects. And I think Tara O'Malley, Tara, are you going to brief the board on this?
I sure am. Can you hear me?
Sure can. Thank you very
Great.
much, Tara.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Tara O'Malley, Principal Financial Analyst in the Capital Programming Department. I'm here to request approval of 2 ordinances. First, we are requesting an amendment of the 2021 to 2025 capital program, incorporating changes in the program revenues and expenses for CTA, Metra, and PACE. Second, we are requesting you approve time extensions for CTA, Metra, and PACE, Innovation, Coordination, and Enhancement, or ICE, funded projects, as well as the reallocation of Metra ICE funds. Let me walk you through the changes we are recommending in the first ordinance. This quarter, we are asking you to approve a total net funding increase of $46.2 million. The sources for increased funding are federal discretionary grants, including Department of Homeland Security or DHS funds, Section 5339C Low or No Emission Bus Program, Section 5312 Safety, Demonstration, and Research Program, and Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality or CMAQ funds. Additional funding includes lapsing formula funds, service board and local funds, and reprogrammed and/or carryover funds from previous years. The total increase for CTA is $20.5 million, for Metra is $25.5 million, and for PACE is $0.2 million. The project and budget changes in the capital program are included in the memo in Schedules 2A and 2B attached to this ordinance. On to the second ordinance. We are requesting your approval of the 12-month extension for 2 CTA, 4 Metra, and 2 PACE projects, and requesting the approval of reprogramming of ICE funds for Metra. For Metra. We are moving funds from completed projects to projects that are in progress and needed additional funding. These are outlined in your board memo. RTA staff has reviewed these requests and found them to be justified as outlined in the ordinance request memo. I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, we are seeking your approval of these 2 ordinances.
Thank you. Any question of the board for Ms. O'Malley?
One moment, Mr. Chairman. I see no questions at this time.
Okay, then how about a motion and a second to adopt the 2 ordinances in item 7B?
Motion.
Events and the ICE funding.
Got a motion by Director Ross, second by Director Andalcio.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Secretary, please take the roll.
Director Andalcio.
Aye.
Director Canty. Director Canty. Go to Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson.
Aye.
Director Fuentes.
Aye.
Director Gathing.
Aye.
Director Gorman.
Aye.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Holt.
Aye.
Director Cotel.
Aye.
Director Lewis. Director Melvin.
Yes.
Director Pang.
Yes.
Director Ross.
Aye.
Director Sager. Chairman Dillard.
Aye.
And going back up to Director Canty.
I am also aye. Sorry about that.
No problem. 14 ayes, 2 absent, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you. And that will be, those 2 ordinances are approved. Item 7C is an ordinance establishing estimates of funding amounts available to the service boards for the 2022-2024 operating budgets, the required recovery ratios for 2022, and the preliminary 2022 to 26 capital program funding announce. And I think both B. Rta Hickey and Jill Leary will brief the board on this one.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and our guests. This is B. Rta Hickey, the Chief Financial Officer. Before I begin, I just wanted to add a comment to the long-term refunding. As you know, we noted the savings net cost of issuance. And I just wanted to tell the board that the cost of issuance is about $265,000. And that's what we're paying, of course, a combination of folks, the bond trustees, and so forth. So I wanted to just let people know what our cost of issuance is. Here I am presenting our funding amendments, our funding amounts for the next couple of years. Over the past couple of months, RTA staff has met several times with CTA, Metro, and PACE finance teams to refine the proposed operating funding and capital amounts you are considering today. My thanks go out to the service board CFOs for their candid input and cooperation. Recent RTA sales tax performance has pleasantly surprised us. As you heard, we've had some record months, better than Christmas months. And as a result, the proposed operating funding amounts are at record levels. Because of the uncertainty of ongoing recovery of our transit system, RTA is temporarily holding off allocating the third round of federal relief ARPA funding of approximately $1.5 billion. You saw the CARES Act funding that had been spent down by Service Board, and you noted that CRISA monies have not been spent down for the most part. ARPA funding allocations are not under consideration today. Instead, the proposed Service Board's operating budgets we receive next month will guide that allocation, but more on that later. I will be giving you the details of the operating funding allocations for 2022, followed by Jill Leary, who will present the capital funding picture. Next slide, please. The proposed ordinance would adopt the operating and capital funding amounts, or marks, for the 2022 budget and 5-year capital program. Setting the marks or the funding allocations is a critical step in the RTA region's annual budget process. The RTA Act establishes September 15th as the date by which the funding amounts for the upcoming year must be adopted. And the Act further requires that the service boards develop budgets that are consistent with the approved funding amounts. The approved marks will be supplemented by federal relief funding comprised of existing CARES Act and CRISA funding, as well as the yet to be allocated ARPA funding. Next slide, please. RTA sales tax performance has been on a roller coaster since the onset of COVID. While the actual RTA sales tax receipts declined by about 8% in 2020, the duration and magnitude of the sales tax drop off were both less than initially feared. By January 2021, sales tax has resumed positive year-over-year growth, bolstered by the initiation of the RTA sales tax on more online purchases. As we have stated at previous board meetings, sales tax set an all-time monthly record in March 2021, only to be broken 2 months later by the March sales tax results. With 5 months of actual results in place and a conservative projection for the remaining 7 months of the year, we can now confidently project that the 2021 base will rebound by about 20% from those 2020 lows. Due to recent COVID trends, including the rise of variant cases and the renewal of some mitigation measures, we have lowered our growth assumption for 2022 sales tax to 1%, resulting in projected receipts of just under $1.4 billion, but well above the previous annual record set in 2019. The 2023 and 2024 forecasts assume growth of around 2.5% each year. The real estate transfer tax, or RET, is assumed to grow in line with sales tax. The projected RET level for 2022 is $65.6 million, about 5% higher than the pre-COVID 2019 result. Next slide, please. This table shows the resulting amounts of RTA operating funding proposed for each service board in bold, compared to the previous 2022 plan adopted with the 2021 budget. Due to the resurgence in the sales tax and the discontinuation of the 5% public transportation fund cut, or PTF, the proposed service board funding amounts are up by 26 to 28% from the previous forecast. The detail behind these overall funding levels was provided to the service board's finance teams on September 1st. Of particular note is the increase in ADA paratransit funding for 2022. That funding requirement is being driven by recovering ridership and increases in the City of Chicago minimum wage. RTA staff met with PACE in late July to better understand their specific assumptions for ADA. Overall funding for the RTA's combined requirements is down by $4.4 million from previous expectation due to the reduced short-term borrowing expense related to greatly improved state funding delays. Next slide, please. The proposed ordinance also sets the required service board recovery ratios for the upcoming year. They are unchanged for the 2021 requirements and designed to combine to just slightly above the statutory 50% requirement for the regional adoption. In order to meet these requirements in their 2022 proposed budget, the service boards will likely need to count existing and prospective federal relief funding as operating revenue for recovery ratio purposes. The proposed ordinance authorizes that inclusion, just as the board did previously for the CARES Act and CRISA funding. Due to expected increases in service to accommodate ridership, the service board should be able to meet these required ratios with their 2022 budgets. These budgets are expected to show higher expense levels and therefore require more relief funding, which in turn counts toward the recovery ratio. Next slide, please. Due primarily to the excellent sales tax performance, previously allocated federal relief funding is currently projected to support the service board's operating budgets well into 2022. As shown in the chart, about 76% of CARES Act funding has been drawn down through the July 2021 results, but less than 2% of the second wave of relief funding, CRISA, has been drawn. ARPA funding apportionment requires careful consideration to preserve funds for the uncertainty of future budget years. Accordingly, the RTA's approach for the initial allocation of ARPA funding is to let the service board's proposed 2022 budgets convey their ARPA need. The proposed Marks ordinance directs the service board to submit proposed operating budgets which quantify the amount of ARPA funding needed above and beyond any remaining CARES Act and CRISA funding they may have to achieve balance with the assumed ridership, operating revenue, RTA funding, and operating expenses. This approach should ensure that ARPA funding is placed where it is needed most, and as a result will best serve the region's residents for as long as possible. The proposed budgets will be fully vetted by the CTA, Metro, and PACE boards, the RTA staff, and the RTA board, as well as subject to the required public hearing process. Provided that those steps are completed successfully, the appropriate ARPA allocations for 2022 will be made concurrent with the regional budget adoption process. Now I will turn it over to Jill for discussion of the capital funding amounts. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Bea. Focusing first on the 2022 capital program, please note that it does not include any state Rebuild Illinois bond funds, since those funds have been programmed in the previous 2 years of the capital program. Therefore, the region's share of the state motor fuel tax, known as PAYGO funding, is more prominent and represents roughly 1/5 of the little more than $1 billion in the annual program. The federal formula funds are based on levels established by the current federal transportation reauthorization, the FAST Act, and are estimated based on the actual 2020 apportionments. The FAST Act is expiring this September, and as Leanne covered in her ED report, we are monitoring the federal transportation reauthorization process. Next slide. This chart shows how the capital funding from all the sources is split amongst the service boards for this next year. Next slide. And finally, here's the 5-year program by funding source. As a reminder, the performance-based capital allocation process that you approved in July is reflected in these marks for the federal funds and the PAYGO funds for years 2025 and 2026. I'll now turn this back over to Bea to close out the presentation. Next slide, please.
So finally, here is a snapshot of the budget calendar through the remainder of the year. The RTA board adopted the budget call in May in the May meeting, setting up the budget development schedule. Today, we are recommending board adoption of the funding allocations as presented. On October 15th, the service boards submit their proposed operating budgets, 2-year financial plans, and 5-year capital programs to the RTA before entering into the public hearing process in October and November. November 15th is the statutorily defined date for the service boards to submit their adopted budgets to the RTA. On November 18th, the RTA board meeting will feature presentations of the budgets and capital programs by each transit agency. On December 16th, staff will present the consolidated regional budget and program for board adoption. This concludes our presentations. Jill and I are requesting board adoption of the funding amounts as presented, and we will be happy to answer any questions. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jill and B. Questions or comments from the board?
One moment, Mr. Chairman. Director Colson has a raised hand.
Yeah, thank you. On page 9 of the report, you mentioned that CARES Act and the CRISA funding can be used for capital. And that was new information for me. Certainly a one-time infusion of money commends itself to use as capital. Under what circumstances can you use this money for capital, and are you contemplating doing it, or under what circumstances do you think you would do it?
I'm going to answer that, B. Yes, both CARES and CRISA and ARPA funds are eligible for capital expenses. Currently, the service boards, as you know, are planning to use these for relief funding for their operating funds. I think as part of their budget process this year, we'll see what their additional plans are. We view these as kind of emergency relief funds on the operating side, but they can be used, and that would be at the service board's discretion to use those as capital funds. We've already obviously allocated the CARES and CRISA funds, so those are at the service boards, but for the ARPA funds, that could be a consideration as well.
Do we know what other transit agencies are doing? Are some using it for capital? Leanne, B, or Jill?
I'll chime in. Nearly all, especially our peers and the large ones, are using them for operating funds. You could see we showed last month with the quarterly performance, there's not a lot of spend down across the nation on these, so we'll continue to monitor it. But it's especially since ridership is down and the transit is showing slower recovery with the economy, we'll continue to monitor that. But we haven't seen a lot of use of capital funds in those relief funds.
And I would add that, transit agencies throughout the country are funded differently, right? So structurally, it could be very different, which then dictates how much they need to use of the funds or not. So it depends on their funding structure.
Just the only additional comment that I'll add to that is Jeremy and I are very engaged with a peer group. We call it the Metropolitan Rail Discussion Group, which is actually kind of all the legacy systems across the country. We meet every 2 weeks and talk about this and a variety of different topics. And so there has been a lot of back and forth, and I think Jill touched on it, that largely to a large extent the big legacy transit systems are treating it mostly in the operating space, but technically by law there is the option for capital, and they'd have to go to FTA for approval on that. But like Jill said too, as we look to see what the service board sort of plan for their 22 and beyond budgets, we can continue in that conversation and sort of see what opportunities and things we want to do in allocation of those dollars.
Right. Just one other comment, since we're on this topic of ridership and money, and I don't know, I didn't look, and I'm going to get it to Tina Smith so she can send it on to the entire board, but I found it unbelievably ironic that the Chicago Tribune yesterday had a major editorial begging taxi cabs to come back and talking about the rideshare industry, on how it's now more expensive and they're harder to find for a number of reasons. But you talk about Back to the Future, where they're begging the taxi cab medallion companies to please come back because of lack of ride sharing, and then how expensive ride sharing has become of late. And I just thought, vis-a-vis us, and there is no ever will be a substitute just because of the millions of people we move versus ride share. But I just thought that editorial was very interesting, that they're calling for what you and I know as the old taxi cab system to please come back, and that ride shares have become very expensive if you can find ride shares. So it's just amazing how the world turns, and we're still the backbone of our transportation system in Metropolitan Chicago. But I just thought that was curious. I'll get that editorial to all of you because it's just very, very interesting. Jeremy, you see any other hands up?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Director
Yes.
Peng's got a raised hand.
Yes, Sarah, Director Peng.
On the ARPA money, I've talked to Leanne about this a little bit, very lightly, and I know we have to get through our own budget calendar for 2022, but I think it would be prudent for Leanne and the team to get dates on the calendars for January and February with the EDs to talk about closing, fixing that or addressing the split with Indiana and Illinois, which has to come first, then talk through the allocations and get agreement. This always takes longer than we think it's going to. And then I believe that we need to obligate the money early, because there is a lot of chatter that it can get clawed back. And we don't know what Congress is going to look like later on. If it's not obligated, I think it could be clawed back. And you can see some signals even from the current administration that they want it obligated as early as possible. But
Yes.
we can get through the 2022 budget first, but I think it'd be prudent to get some of those meetings on the calendar.
Thanks, Director Peng. And yeah, I know we have had sort of a bit of at least high-level discussion on this, and I couldn't agree more. And that's the perspective and sort of comments that I've had as recently with Dorval end of last week, but also with the other EDs. And I do think that's the game plan we want to tackle because it is important for all the points you just raised.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great for us to get past that and then start talking about our strategic policies and really go after new ways of working as a region, so that we weren't getting friction between each other in the service boards, but rather competing with other regions. That's it.
And absolutely. And that's, I think, perfectly, again, in alignment with the sort of strategic plan work that we're going to do over the next coming, certainly that's going to be the heavy lift of that is going to come in the next 3 to 6 months. And that's absolutely what we need to tackle, as I talked about on the front end, with a focus on Springfield and a short-term and a longer-term strategy around that as well. And all of that's going to be guided from those conversations. So appreciate those insights and that support. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Director Peng, that was great. A very, very important comment, suggestion. All right.
Mr. Chairman, Director Carey's got a raised hand as well.
Yes, Director Carey.
Those are great comments, Director Peng. And that's a very interesting insight, and I appreciate that. I was going to go back to the question of capital versus operating, and I guess I would just caution us and caution the service boards. While I agree with you, Director Colson, that typically a one-time infusion of money seems better suited to capital than operating, this is an extraordinary situation we're in. So to me, the main reason we have access to this money is to keep our systems running. And while we have no end of uses for capital money, we just need to be careful that we don't spend it on capital and find we need it to continue to support operating a couple years down the road. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Director. Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to approve item 7C.
We have a motion from Director Groven and a second from Director Pang.
Great, thank you too. With that, Jeremy, please take the roll.
Sure. Director Indulcio.
Aye.
Director Canty. Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson.
Aye.
Director Fuentes.
Aye.
Director Gavin.
Aye.
Director Gorman.
Aye.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Holt.
Yes.
Director Cotel.
Aye.
Director Lewis. Director Melvin.
Yes.
Director Pang.
Yes.
Director Ross.
Aye.
Director Sager. Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
And Director Canty. Oh, I believe you're on mute.
Can you not hear me?
Now we
Okay,
can.
sorry, it was muted on my phone. Aye.
14 ayes, 2 absent, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And we'll note that Dr. Sager wanted to be in the record that he supported item 7C.
Yes.
7C is adopted. Thank you. Thanks, B and Jill and Leanne, everybody. Item 7D is an ordinance authorizing a contract for the audio-visual equipment update that we need in the RTA boardroom and board conference room, especially since post-COVID. And with that, Michael Vandercreek, you want to brief the board on this one?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Sorry.
Thank you so much. And yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Staff is requesting board approval of an ordinance authorizing a contract with Pace Systems Incorporated to update the audio-visual equipment in the boardroom and the board conference room on our 16th floor. The contract also covers the installation, configuration, and warranties for all the equipment. If you have any questions about this item, I'm really happy to take them at this time. And back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this one?
I see a raised hand from Director Pang. I believe it might be a holdover from the last item.
Holdover, sorry.
No problem.
Thank
One moment. I see no other hands at the moment.
But how about a motion and a second to approve this?
Motion from Director Carey, second from Director Canty.
Thank you. A roll call is required. So, Mr. Secretary, please take the roll.
Sure. Director Indulcio.
Aye.
Director Canty.
Aye.
Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson.
Aye.
Director Fuentes.
Aye.
Director Gavin.
Aye.
Director Gorman.
Aye.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Holt.
Aye.
Director Cotel.
Aye.
Director Lewis. Director Melvin.
Yes.
Director Pang.
Yes.
Director Ross.
Aye.
Director Sager. Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
14 ayes, 2 absent, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. And I look forward to getting back to using the RTA boardroom and board conference room in person very soon with you all. Item 7E is an ordinance authorizing the settlement of an eminent domain litigation question, which I think the board discussed perhaps last time in an executive session, and the purchase of real property on behalf of Pace Suburban Bus. And with that, our General Counsel, Nadine Lacombe, will brief us.
Good morning again, Chairman and Directors. The ordinance before you authorizes the RTA to settle the eminent domain matter with the owner of the subject property and serves to ratify the purchase price of $975,000. As a reminder, the board authorized the litigation and the acquisition of the property by eminent domain on behalf of Pace Suburban Bus back in 2018. Pursuant to an intergovernmental agreement, Pace will reimburse the RTA for the cost of the property and has reimbursed RTA throughout the litigation for all costs and fees. The ordinance is only necessary in order to specify the purchase price, which was obviously not available at the time the board previously approved the condemnation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are questions for our council?
I see no hands at this time.
Great. With that, may I entertain a motion to approve and second?
Motion by Director Gathing and a second by Director Gorman.
Thank you. And Jeremy, please take the roll.
Director Indalcio.
Aye.
Director Canty.
Aye.
Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson.
Aye.
Director Fuentes.
Aye.
Director Gathing.
Aye.
Director Gorman.
Aye.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Holt.
Aye.
Director Cotel.
Aye.
Director Lewis. Director Melvin.
Yes.
Director Pang.
Yes.
Director Ross.
Aye.
Director Sager. Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
14 ayes, 2 absent, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And 7E, the ordinance is approved. Item 7F is approval of travel expense reimbursement as required. Any questions or comments on that? Otherwise, I'll take a motion in a second that's our last order of required business.
I see, sorry, I saw a hand from Director Gorman, but I think it might be a holdover from the last item.
Yes, holdover. Yep.
Okay.
Great. So how about a motion in a second on?
Looks like we've got a motion from Director Melvin and a second from Director Indalcio.
Great. With that, take the roll, Mr. Secretary.
Director Indalcio.
Aye.
Director Canty.
Aye.
Director Carey.
Aye.
Director Colson.
Aye.
Director Fuentes.
Aye.
Director Gathing.
Aye.
Director Gorman.
Aye.
Director Groven.
Aye.
Director Holt.
Yes.
Director Cotel.
Aye.
Director Lewis. Director Melvin. Director Pang.
Yes.
Director Ross.
Aye.
Director Sager. Chairman Dillard.
Aye.
14 ayes, 2 absent.
Thank you. And the record will reflect Dr. Sager said that he would vote for that as well. Item 8 is new business. Is there any new business to come before the board this morning?
I see no hands at this time.
Okay. Then as a reminder, our next board meeting is scheduled back to a Thursday, October 21 at 9 a.m. If there's no further business to come before the public session of the Board of Directors, I will entertain a motion and a second to adjourn. Nadine, we don't have an executive session this month, do we not?
We do not, Chairman.
Okay. And with that, motion and a second to adjourn.
Motion by Director Fuentes, second by Director Gavin.
Great. All those in favor of adjournment signify by hitting the little leave button on your computer, and we'll talk again next week. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.